Well, hi everybody, Father Alex here. Welcome to another episode of the Godcast. I'm the vicar of St Matthew's Church. Just for your information, I'm also the host of the Godcast, and I'm the author of the book Our Daily Bread from Argos to the Altar, a Priest's Story, which is available online and in all good bookshops. So do check that out if you feel so inclined. My guest this week on the Godcast is Chrissie Wellington OBE. Chrissie is uh, a four times Ironman triathlon champion. She's an incredible lady. She's OBE, and we're going to hear a bit about her story and about her thoughts on fitness and mind matters. So it's going to be a great Godcast. Do check out others if you like or enjoy this one. You can follow me on X at AlexDJFrost, or you can check out the YouTube channel where you'll find interviews with lots of sports people, musicians, politicians, priests, clergy, and everything else. So do go check it out. But for now, I hope you enjoy this interview with Chrissie Wellington OBE. Well, I'm delighted to say that joining me on the Godcast this week is Chrissie Wellington OBE, no less. And Chrissie is an elite athlete, Ironman world champion numerous times. And Chrissie, it's just great to get you on. How are you doing?
Oh, I'm doing really well, Alex. Thank you so much for inviting me to be on the podcast.
Yeah. Where's home? Are you based in the UK?
Originally from Norfolk, but left Norfolk aged 18 and have lived in various places in the UK and around the world, and now really fortunate to call Somerset our home. So live in a small, very rural village in Somerset, south of Bristol.
Lovely, lovely part of the world. Okay, well
Yeah.
let's get down to business, Chrissy. Now I've got quite a broad guest list and very eclectic. So let's just start with the real basics. So when we say Ironman triathlete, what are we talking about?
Um, Ironman triathlon is one of the longest distances of triathlon that you can do. So triathlon is swim, bike, and run, varying distances from the sprint distance triathlon all the way up to the most masochistic of all, the Ironman triathlon. So it comprises a 2.4 mile swim, a 112 mile bike ride, and then finished off with a marathon.
Wow. You can almost hear the kind of groans got you from
You're just trying to
millions.
compute it. When I
Yeah.
was thinking about it, I was like, yeah, that's, yeah, describing it to our daughter. And yeah, that's like kind of cycling from here to London and then adding a little bit more. And it feels inconceivable, actually, Alex, to me now. When I first took up triathlon, I did the much shorter distances and thought that people that did Ironman distance, oh, they're absolutely crazy and it wasn't for me. But I think it really goes to show that if you break something down and you progress towards it with kind of small incremental steps, what is formerly inconceivable, becomes possible. And that was very much the case for me.
So when did it seem plausible? Were you kind of the girl at the sports day event that was like miles in front of everybody else, and we all just looked on in awe and wonder? Was that
I
natural gift there from an early age?
I didn't take I guess what would be termed a conventional, stereotypical path to professional sport. So I think from the outside, often, people think that professional sports people have wanted to do and have specialized in their sport from a very young age. And that's true of the kind of Adam Peaty's and maybe David Beckham's and Serena Williams's of this world, but wasn't really the case for me. So I was an active child, never really invested time and energy in fulfilling any potential I might have had in sport, was very much focused on academia and excellence in my kind of academic studies. So that was really what I focused on. And sport for me was something that I enjoyed, and very much appreciated that social connection that came through sport and physical activity. When I went to uni, again, kind of anchored my time around kind of fulfilling my kind of academic aspirations. Then I went traveling, and really sport and activity took a back seat. in favor of kind of exploration and socializing and things like that. And it was really at the kind of tail end of my traveling and then coming and doing my MA back in the UK that I started walking and then segued into running. But for me, in retrospect, it was very much anchored around mental health. So needing to give myself that almost that creative space, I think, that I felt was lacking. I think, our lives get very, very busy and very noisy. And I started walking and then running just to give myself that physical space, but also that psychological space. And I was inspired by a friend that had done the London Marathon, and I looked at her and I looked at me and I thought, maybe it's something I can do. And that was where I really cut my teeth in endurance sports.
But there's a big difference, isn't there, between kind of a gentle jog around the park and doing what you're doing. Did you, so when you started running, did it, I mean, I suppose running is a natural thing, but running distance, did that become quite natural? Did you find yourself good at it quite quickly, or was it a progressive thing for you?
I really enjoyed um, the activity of running. I enjoyed the fact that it gave me that, I feel that it gave me that physical and that psychological space, but I also felt my fitness improve, which is very kind of self-gratifying and fulfilling, just to see yourself progress at something. And when you run, there's a very tangible manifestation of improvement. So as a kind of goal focused person, that very much appealed to me. I really truly believe that we all as individuals have innate talents, and that we need to be given opportunities and proactively seize opportunities to be able to explore them. And I'm so blessed to have been surrounded at every stage of my life with people that have encouraged me to explore those talents. And running, and then, after that, triathlon was, I guess, one such example. So yeah, I think in answer to your question, I had a talent for endurance sports that I hadn't previously explored. And I'm so grateful that I was in a position to be able to explore that, because had I not, I never would have known. And so, yeah, starting that process of running, starting that process of exploration of oneself has led to these kind of incredible opportunities that I could never have imagined.
Did you become addicted to running?
Yes, I'd say that the both the physiological addiction, so we'll know that there's endorphins and all these feel good hormones that you get when you're active. They can be addictive. You get addicted to feeling good. Whilst it might not always feel good when you're running, it definitely feels good afterwards. So I think there's that kind of physiological addiction, but there's also that psychological addiction. I started to get addicted to the progress and the achievement of a goal, the structure. Whereas, habit formation is all about, developing routine and developing a structure. So I think that almost becomes addictive as well. Needing to tick that box each day was something that I guess was useful in the pursuit of a goal, but also kind of became addictive. And there's also that societal element, that social element. And I think that's, whilst not necessarily addictive, is when thrown into the mix, makes running and triathlon really, really compelling, because it's not just about you, it's about the wider community with whom you do that activity. And I think that's really really empowering and like I said, a really compelling element of doing that sport.
Chrissy, I'm sure an elite athlete like yourself will have, and also your involvement with parkrun and things like that will have looked at psychology as a big part of elite sports, isn't it? Have you ever contemplated a kind of addiction for a good cause like running and getting healthy, and maybe people who suffer from addiction with a not so positive outcome? Again, quite a lot of people who listen to my podcast will be from my context, and there will be people who will have addictions to other things and not what we wouldn't consider positive things. I'll be as blunt to say, drugs of mind-altering substances. What's going on there in the mind, do you think, when somebody gets addicted to something for a positive outcome and to feel really good at it, and somebody who's addicted to something to have a good feeling, but at the end of it have a kind of a real negative, kind of a downward perspective on things. Is that something you've looked at or thought about yourself?
I mean, I wouldn't claim to be, a psychologist or a healthcare clinician that would be able to answer that with any kind of authority. But I have throughout my life struggled with eating disorders or disordered eating behaviors, which are at the root, an addictive and very, very negative and quite deleterious kind of behavior. And so I very much saw sport as my route to almost flipping that from being very, very negative, a very, very negative way of viewing my body and approaching my body, to something that was positive. So I kind of channeled that almost addictive, controlling behavior into something that was negative, into something that was positive. But still, Alex, that needs to be managed, because otherwise sport can go and does go from being a very positive influence on one's life to being something that can be detrimental if not done, mindfully and with your long-term health, as being paramount. And that's something I had to be really, really careful of, and that I wasn't replacing this kind of negative addiction with a positive addiction. If I look outside of my own kind of context, I look to a number of other people in the public eye that have had addictions, drug addictions, for example, and have almost channeled that ability to be goal driven and that ability to follow through on a or just be very purpose driven, but in a negative way, to something very, very positive, and that's sport. So there are a number of examples in my sport of triathlon of those that have been addicted to drugs being able to then transition into the world of endurance sports very effectively, because unfortunately, those, or fortunately, maybe those behaviors can be transposed on a positive activity. So I think they give me hope that even if you are feeling like your addiction is leading you down a kind of negative, detrimental path, there is the opportunity, with support, of course, to be able to utilize those behaviors and skills, but focus on something positive.
Yeah, thanks for that. Something I might come back to if we have time at the end. But just returning to your career as an athlete, Chrissie, what was the thing that made you go from being a runner for fun to be a runner for a profession, to really take it seriously, to strive to be the very best?
I was in my 20s. I did my MA in international development, in development economics, and was really fortunate to get my dream job. I was working for the government, advising on international development policy. And at that time is when I kind of started running. Then I'd meet someone that would again change the direction of my life, and they'd suggested I do a triathlon, and that I did a sprint triathlon very much at the amateur level. And then I went to live and work in Nepal. So I was managing water and sanitation projects in Nepal. And it was really there that I was thrown into the world of endurance sports, but not in terms of kind of structured, regimented training. It was very raw. Like we were exploring, Alex. It was adventure, and we were cycling 1,000 plus kilometers over the Himalayas, at 5,000 meters. And I didn't see that as training with a kind of goal in mind. It was really just about the beauty, experiencing the beauty of the environment and of the communities and the people I was with. And but that, in retrospect, was absolutely incredible and foundational in that it obviously I developed physical strength, but also that psychological strength of training in those type of conditions. I think it gives you that sense that you can endure and you can overcome. So I came back to the UK, back to my job as a civil servant, decided I was going to throw myself into a couple of triathlons, and things changed very, very quickly for me in that I got a coach, I joined a club, I managed to win the World Championships at an amateur level. And then age 30, I had a big decision to make, and it was very much a fork in the road moment. Do I or do I not become a professional athlete? And those fork in the road moments are scary, aren't they? I was scared of what people might think. I was 30, embarking on a professional sporting career, scared of financial insecurity, leaving my friends, leaving my family, what people would think, of ridicule. But I never want to look back and think, what if? And I never want to be left wondering what might have been. So I was 30 and decided to become a professional triathlete. So relatively late in the kind of professional sporting career, scheme of things. But I think also I was equipped through all of the different life experiences that I'd had to make a real success of this new career.
It's fascinating listening to you, Chrissie. I mean, I'm not an athlete, but I'm a priest, and I had to make a similar choice. I didn't go to church till I was 40. People who've read the book and watched the podcast one, and that choice, that crossroads, that decision, and all the things you described, the ridicule, people making fun of me, but I just
Yeah.
felt you had to do it. And it's a big thing. I want to ask you what. In a previous life, I used to work for Argos before I became a priest, and we were Argos were very good I was a manager, and they were very good at using motivational speakers. And I'm
Yeah.
sure you've done that in your career. And we had some wonderful speakers. I remember Lizzie Arnold came to talk to us, Adrian Morehouse
Oh,
came to talk to
incredible.
us. But
Yeah.
there was one that really stood out, and that was Sir Clive Woodward, who came and talked to us, and he talked about his kind of non-negotiables to becoming the very best. And I'm pretty sure it was him who said he used the analogy of the training kit, and the lads had to turn up in the right kit. And if somebody was wearing odd socks, that meant that something wasn't quite right in the team. I wondered what your non-negotiables were in kind of your career to becoming the very, very best.
Yeah, that's interesting, isn't it? That those guardrails are in place both for individuals and and for the team. And I think that's so important to have your own kind of value-driven guardrails. So my non-negotiables for myself are integrity. So always um, to kind of race and train with integrity, and that's so important as a professional sports person. Um, to work hard, to commit to executing as best I can, day in, day out. And I think lastly, to race with or to live with passion and purpose. That was so important to me. It is so important to me. I believe that, if I was put on this world to do something, it was to enact positive change, to drive positive change, to inspire people and motivate people to do something more than they think possible. And I take that very, very seriously. And I felt that as a professional athlete in what is a very selfish pursuit, because it's all about you and your goal, especially in independent sport or individual sport, sorry, like triathlon. But you have an opportunity and you have a responsibility as a professional athlete to leverage that and to harness that. And I felt really, really strongly that I wanted to use sport as a vehicle to still drive change. So I think that was, if it can be a non-negotiable, that is to kind of live my life with kind of passion and purpose.
Yeah. And are you would you describe yourself as one of these advocates of your sometimes the biggest failures are your biggest successes? I've in my career
Mm.
I'm very pleased where I am and where I've got to, but I've had a lot of setbacks, and in my vocation to becoming a priest, I had a lot of disappointments that were extremely painful at the time. But now where I am now, obviously I a bit wiser, a bit older, and I appreciate and value those experiences. Are there any examples of setbacks that you can share, Chrissy, that actually help you get to where you ultimately wanted to be?
Yeah, I think it's when you look in the rearview mirror, isn't it, Alex, that you can join the dots and you can see how everything starts to make sense. And I would imagine that you're in the position that you are now because of those setbacks and not despite of them. And I guess by that I mean that they're absolutely necessary. So they're not there to derail you from a path or derail one, must be, more generally from a path. They're there to enable you to transition or to journey along that path. So I think when you're in the midst of a setback, it's incredibly difficult, but that's where the growth and learning take place. So of course, as an athlete or as a person, more generally, I've had setbacks. So I've had times where things didn't go according to plan, pain, injuries, disappointment. But it's how you lean into those and the strategies and the tools that you use to enable you to endure those and navigate those and utilize those, that determine whether or not they do derail you or they're that springboard to success. And I definitely look at the strategies I've used to overcome adversity, whether that's that kind of psychological reframing, whether it's practical strategies, and or it's leaning into others, all of those different things that you can do when you're faced with adversity. But I think it's leaning into those, using those, drawing on them, again and again, that enables you to then achieve your goal. But I don't think there's anyone that you can look to that hasn't in some way encountered adversity. And I think it's really how we deal with it that determines.
Something going back to my August days. I mean, I loved listening to elite sports people. I love sport. A huge lover of all sport, really, and I was absolutely transfixed. But I did sometimes wonder, what about Bill at the end of the line or Joe at the other end of the line, who's like 30 stone, smoking 40 cigarettes a day, how they could be inspired by that person. And moving on to my context now, and I'm just going to be honest, it's very challenging where I am, and we have
Mm.
numerous problems. One, I'm currently working with Radio 4 on a documentary about ketamine addiction in young people, which is just
Mm.
horrible, Chrissy, if I'm being honest. But how do we inspire, some of the people, not all of them, but some of the people in my context, the people who have had a pretty tricky start in life anyway, and they've gone on and become parents, and and they love their children as much as the next person does. But there is an issue, I think, what I sometimes describe as a poverty of motivation and aspiration, and I'm just wondering whether you could, I know some of the people from my circumstances listen to this. How do we encourage people like that who are really at a very low ebb to kind of just make a start somewhere?
Um, I think first of all, I guess understanding that you don't have to make macro sizable steps, that the most significant step is starting. And that's that. If, for example, if we're embarking on a movement journey, I think there's this misconception that you then have to be active for 30 minutes a day or something like that. If you can commit to being active for 1 minute a day, that's progress and that's an improvement. So I think it sounds defeatist, I think, or unambitious maybe, but really make that first step small, because then that's encourages habit formation, and that's really, really important. I think role modeling is incredibly important. So as you rightly said, I may not resonate with the ketamine addicted teenager, but there will be someone that has traveled that path and is out the other side and can speak to the experience with much more authority and resonance than I could. So I think it's about finding those people that would resonate with the community that that you're working with. I also think in terms of health improvements, it should be about what matters to that individual. And I think within every individual is agency, and it's about working with that individual to find out what really, really, really matters for them. And I think lastly, creating an environment. By environment, it can be our structural environment or also our social environment that's conducive to change. I think if we're always surrounded by the same influencers, it's really difficult to change a habit. But if we can make subtle changes to our environment, instead of, for a young person, instead of being on a street corner, being encouraged potentially to move into a youth club where there's some mutual support, that can make all the difference. You're making a subtle shift, a really important shift to their social environment and their structural environment, which I think can help precipitate change.
Yeah, thanks, Chrissy. That's really helpful, and I hope people are encouraged by that. The time's whizzing by, but still got a few questions I want to ask. I want to ask what it's like being the best person in the world at something. I mean, that's something I can't get my head around. It's like, and I love it. Seb Coe was the first guy I kind of thought was incredible, but just that feeling of being the world record holder. I suppose it comes with an element of responsibility and humility, does it?
It's an absolute privilege to be 4-time world champion. And I hold that title very, very carefully. And I do see it as a responsibility to have been crowned world champion. It's not something I ever imagined happening. So I still have these kind of pinch me moments that I can even call myself world champion. But I'm under no illusions. I think we put professional sports people on pedestals, and yes, they can be examples of drive and discipline and hard work and all of the kind of character traits that can be seen as admirable. But these character traits are personified in so many people across so many different specialisms. So sometimes I feel very uncomfortable, being held up as kind of put on this pedestal and held up as kind of best in the world, when I look to people that are achieving some phenomenal things with no kind of recognition or accolades. And for me, they're kind of almost like the true heroes. So on the one hand, yes, it's incredible. It gives you a platform. It gives you a voice. I think it's symbolic of, a lot of the kind of character traits that can, achieve, kind of be used to achieve success. But also it makes me quite uncomfortable, uncomfortable too.
Yeah, I'm sure. And I'm just trying to make a tenuous link to my, it is called the Godcast. When you've achieved all that and you're metaphorically on the other side of the mountain, or not on the tip of the tip of the mountain point, um, has that been all right for you? I mean, I've spoken to lots of musicians, for example, who split up with band members and other people, and it's almost been like a period of mourning or a period of loss. Did you find that yourself, not being that ultra competitive person? I'm sure that competitive nature never leaves somebody who's got a competitive nature, but how was it in your regard?
Yeah, it's interesting you draw on the example of musicians. There's also, I think, the example of those that are in the forces and have served our country, and then left. And I think some of the, the psychological and the practical implications of that, cross sectors. I left the sport having intuitively feeling that I'd achieved all I ever needed to, and that I'd answered the question about how good could you be. And I had the race that I always dreamed of, the race where I felt that I dug to the very depths. And I think that liberated me. And I knew it, like I said, intuitively, that it was time to retire as a professional athlete. But in doing so, you kind of launch yourself off this cliff and you're thinking, have I got a parachute? Where's my parachute? Where am I going to land? You lose your structure, your goal, your support network, financial security, validation, identity. All of that is woven up into being a professional athlete. And I remember I'd retired from professional sport. I was on a plane, and it was the time going to the States, and it was a time when you had to fill out the form in hard copy, and the question was profession. I was like, what am I? I can't really put like retired professional athlete. And I said, I don't know what I am. I don't know who I am, and I don't know what I am. But I have to be comfortable in that void. That void is so important because you need to give yourself space. I knew what I didn't want. I had no clue about where I was going. And so I think you go through that process, like you very, very kind of accurately said, that process of mourning that loss of self, that the person that you were, the achievements that you had. And you need to, if you can, which is a luxury, give yourself that space to kind of reconnect with you as something bigger than, in my context, a professional triathlete. Like, I knew I was something more. I knew I had more to offer. I knew I had a depth of experience and skills that went beyond just swimming, cycling, and running. But trying to carve out a path that built on all of that was really hard. And I think that we look at professional sports people, we look at how hard that transition is, often with the most dire of consequences. And it's incumbent upon us as a society to support people going through that transition, and to equip professional sports people while they're still training and racing to be able to have a fulfilling and satisfying life post sport. So yes, it was hard, but hopefully I stand here as a testament to the fact that you can transition, and there is life life post sport. But I think for me, having that community, having that social circle around me was absolutely integral to me
Yeah.
moving on.
Well, Chrissy, I've that 35 minutes is absolutely whizzed by. I've loved chatting to you. I found it absolutely fascinating, and people can find you. You've got your own website, and you've got numerous books out there, haven't you? So people can just Google you and find out more about you and explore what else you've got to say. I wish we could talk for hours, but yeah. But Chrissy, it's been great having you on. Thanks for coming on the Godcast.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been an absolute pleasure.